Joel Poulsen. The first case on our list is the murder of Joel Poulsen, a young hiker from South Carolina, who became the first ever recorded victim of a homicide on the Appalachian Trail, at a shelter that should have been one of the safest places he could have stopped for the night. Joel Eugene Poulsen was 26 years old, from Hartsville, South Carolina, a small paper mill town northeast of Columbia. He was a slim, mustachioed outdoorsman who wore shorts year-round. His hobbies had evolved from cycling, including an attempted cross-country bike trip that ended in Texas, to a planned through hike of the Appalachian Trail. According to Outside Magazine's long-form feature by Earl Swift, Joel had met a young woman named Margaret McFadden Harrod in March 1974. She was waiting tables at an Italian restaurant in Five Points, Columbia. Their relationship was platonic. He persuaded her to join him on the trail. On the 9th of May 1974, the two of them began their hike at Tesnatee Gap, Georgia. 6 miles into their first day, they reached the Low Gap shelter inside the Chattahoochee National Forest. They were not alone there. A man calling himself Ralph was already at the shelter. He did not have proper hiking gear. Something about him put Joel on edge. How does a man without hiking gear end up at a remote backcountry shelter? The answer was that Ralph was not a hiker at all. Joel quietly told Margaret he distrusted the stranger and wanted to leave at first light. They never got the chance. The next morning, the 10th of May, 1974, Joel walked down to a nearby creek to collect water. While he was gone, Ralph picked up a .22 caliber revolver and shot him once in the head. Then Ralph turned to Margaret. He tied her to a tree, ransacked Joel's pack, and decided not to harm her. Instead, he made the strange decision to take her with him, hiking south for the next 2 days, ultimately getting her a motel room without doing her any harm, and finally putting her on a Greyhound bus before fleeing north to Atlanta. Joel's body was discovered on the 11th of May, 1974. The investigation moved fast. Margaret called police from Columbia and identified Ralph in a photo lineup. A woman in Atlanta saw a news description of the suspect and called in a tip. Police obtained a search warrant on the 16th of May, 1974. Less than a week after Joel was killed, officers arrested a 31-year-old man named Ralph Howard Fox at his Atlanta apartment. Inside, they found Joel's backpack, his traveler's checks, and the revolver. The weapon held 4 live rounds and 1 spent cartridge. The bullet recovered from Joel's head matched it. Now we get to the twist that makes this case one of the most troubling in Appalachian Trail history. Ralph Howard Fox was not a first-time offender. He had a long juvenile and adult record: car theft, breaking and entering, an earlier kidnapping from a party. He had escaped from Michigan State Prison in October 1969 before being recaptured in Miami the following year. He had also, while on parole, attempted to shoot an ex-girlfriend named Anne. None of those red flags had been enough to keep him locked up before he ever met Joel and Margaret on the trail. In October 1975, Fox was indicted, pleaded guilty, and was sentenced to life in Georgia State Prison. The case is documented as the first recorded murder on the Appalachian Trail. That is not where the story ends. In 1991, after serving roughly 17 years, Fox was paroled. Within a year of his release, he had taken another life. He murdered a 29-year-old Michigan woman named Diane Good. He went back to prison. He died there in 2003. Joel Poulsen's case has been re-examined in Outside Magazine and on the Park Predators podcast. The case lives on in the Appalachian Trail History Archive at appalachiantrailhistory.org. While Joel's case took place at a remote backcountry shelter in 1974, the next case took place almost 50 years later, on a much different kind of trail, with a much different kind of perpetrator, and it became one of the most watched cases in modern American memory. Gabby Petito. The next case is one almost everyone in the United States knows by name. A young van life vlogger, a fiancé who went home alone, and a body found in a Wyoming national forest after the case had taken over the internet. Gabrielle Venora, Gabby Petito, was 22 years old, a Long Island native from Blue Point, New York. She was an aspiring travel and van life YouTube creator with a channel called Nomadic Static, which had only a few hundred subscribers at the time she went missing. She was traveling cross-country in a converted white Ford Transit van with her fiancé, Brian Christopher Laundrie, who was 23. Her plan was a 4-month van trip across the western United States. The pair had left Blue Point in early July 2021. On the 12th of August 2021, Moab, Utah police pulled them over after a 911 caller reported a man slapping a woman. Body cam footage showed a sobbing Gabby and a calm Brian, minimizing the situation. Officers concluded that Gabby was the aggressor and separated the couple for the night without an arrest. That decision would later become the center of multiple lawsuits and one piece of state legislation. Their last verified joint sighting was on the 27th of August 2021 at a Tex-Mex restaurant called Mary Piglet's in Jackson, Wyoming. From that point forward, Gabby was never seen alive in public again. Brian Laundrie returned to Northport, Florida on the 1st of September 2021, alone, driving Gabby's van. Gabby's mother filed a missing person report on the 11th of September. How does a missing person case end up reshaping how police respond to domestic violence calls across multiple states? The answer was that the case became viral on TikTok within days of the missing person report being filed. 2 content creators named Kyle and Jen Bethune reviewed dashcam footage from their own van life road trip and identified Gabby and Brian's vehicle parked in the Spread Creek dispersed camping area in Bridger-Teton National Forest. Gabby's remains were found there on the 19th of September 2021. The Teton County coroner ruled her death a homicide. The cause of death was manual strangulation. The time of death was estimated at 3 to 4 weeks earlier. A massive manhunt for Brian Laundrie began. He had disappeared from his parents' Northport home around the 13th of September, telling his family he was going for a walk in a nearby nature reserve. He never came back. After flooding receded in the area, FBI agents and Brian's father located his remains on the 20th of October 2021. With the body, they found a backpack, a notebook, a .38 special revolver, a hat from a coffee shop in Moab, slip-on shoes, and a white metal ring. The District 12 Florida medical examiner ruled his death a suicide by gunshot wound. The FBI's January 2022 final investigative update confirmed that the notebook contained a written statement in which Brian claimed responsibility for Gabby's death. There was no criminal trial possible, but the legal aftermath continued in civil court. The Petito family won a $3 million wrongful death judgment against Brian's estate in November 2022. They settled separately with Brian's parents in February 2024 in a confidential resolution and donated the proceeds to a foundation set up in Gabby's name. Their $50 million lawsuit against Moab City Police, which alleged the department had failed to detect domestic violence during the August traffic stop, was dismissed by a Utah judge in November 2024. The case has produced lasting policy change. In April 2024, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed the Gabby Petito Act into law. The law mandated 12 question lethality assessments during domestic violence calls. It went into effect on the 1st of July 2024. Utah passed a similar law in March 2023. New York's version, backed by Gabby's father in Albany in June 2025, has passed the state Senate. In February 2025, Netflix released a 3-episode documentary called American Murder Gabby Petito. The Laundrie family declined to participate. While Gabby's case was solved by a combination of an autopsy and a written statement, the next case has remained, after more than a decade, one of the most haunting, unresolved disappearances in modern hiking history. Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froon. The next case is one of the strangest disappearances in modern hiking history. Two young Dutch women, a routine afternoon hike in Panama, 90 flash photographs taken in the middle of a pitch-black night, and a backpack found by a riverbank that opened more questions than it ever closed. Chris Kremers was 21 years old, from Amersfoort in the Netherlands, studying cultural social education at Utrecht with a focus on art. Lisanne Froon was 22, from Deventer, who had just completed an applied psychology degree. The two had been close friends since meeting through their work at a cafe in Amersfoort. The trip to Panama was meant as a graduation present to Lisanne. 6 months of saving had paid for 2 weeks of touring and a planned month of volunteering with children near the town of Boquete. They arrived in Panama on the 15th of March, 2014, and reached Boquete on the 29th of March to live with a host family. On the morning of the 1st of April 2014, around 11, they set out with the host family's dog on the Sendero El Pianista Trail, a roughly 4.5-kilometer route to a lookout point near the Continental Divide. They had eaten brunch with 2 young Dutch tourists earlier that morning. The dog returned home alone that evening. The host family alerted authorities the next morning. How does a routine afternoon hike on a marked trail end with 2 healthy young women never coming back? The answer is that nobody fully knows. What investigators do know came from the contents of a single blue backpack and the data still inside the phones it contained. At 4:39 in the afternoon on the 1st of April, Chris's iPhone dialed 112, the Panamanian emergency number. Shortly after, Lisanne's Samsung tried 911. Both calls failed for lack of signal. Roughly 77 emergency call attempts followed across the next several days. Lisanne's phone went dead on the 4th of April. Chris's iPhone was powered on intermittently between the 5th and the 11th, but the correct PIN was never re-entered. Then came the photographs. On the night of the 8th of April, between roughly 1 and 4 in the morning, the camera in the backpack took around 90 flash photographs. Most of them were of pitch-dark jungle. A few showed what appeared to be a twig with plastic bags on a rock. Another showed a backpack strap and a mirror laid out on a rock. One showed the back of Chris's head. One photograph, numbered 508, was apparently deleted and has never been recovered. If you have made it this far and you enjoy content like this, take a second to subscribe and turn on notifications, because the cases coming up next include the first ever Appalachian Trail murder still unsolved, and an attack so fast and brutal it is now a federal cold case the FBI continues to chase. On the 14th of June 2014, a local Nieve woman near Alto Romero in the Bocas del Toro province turned in Lisanne's blue backpack. She had found it by a riverbank. Inside were the camera, both phones, $88 in cash, and the women's documents. All of it was, suspiciously, in dry condition. The searches that followed recovered at least 33 widely scattered bones along the Colubre River. Only around 10% of Lisanne's bones and 5% of Chris's were ever found. Chris's folded denim shorts were found on a rock across a tributary. A Panamanian forensic anthropologist reported no scratches or cultural marks on the bones, which was atypical for animal scavenging. Chris's bones had been bleached and showed elevated phosphorus. Panamanian authorities formally closed the case in March 2015 as an accidental death. The hypothesis was a fall from a cable bridge or cliff, with subsequent river dispersal. The families of both women, along with a global community of independent investigators, have rejected this conclusion ever since. In March 2024, on the 10th anniversary, German journalists released an investigative book titled "Still Lost in Panama," claiming exclusive access to the 3,000 pages of court files, while Chris and Lisanne's case remains officially closed but unresolved. The next case has the opposite distinction. The killer walked off the trail and turned himself in within hours. Janice Balza. The next case shows what happens when a violent encounter on the trail ends not with a manhunt or a chase, but with a killer simply walking down off the mountain and knocking on a stranger's door to confess. Janice Balza was 22 years old, from Wisconsin, a recent University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Nursing graduate. In February 1975, she had begun a planned through hike of the Appalachian Trail at Springer Mountain in Georgia, heading north for Mount Katahdin in Maine. By late April, she had made it into Tennessee. On the night of the 26th of April, 1975, Janice camped at the Vandeventer Shelter, an Appalachian Trail shelter atop Iron Mountain in Tennessee, sitting between two state highways near Watauga Lake. She was not alone. Also at the shelter that night was a 51-year-old man named Paul Walter Bigley. He was a hiker and tree surgeon from Tucson, Arizona, and a former mental health patient. Sometime after breakfast on the 27th of April, Bigley attacked Janice with a hatchet as she sat near his campfire. She did not survive. How does a complete stranger turn on someone over a single morning's breakfast? The answer to this case is one of the strangest in Appalachian Trail history. After the killing, Bigley did not run into the woods. He did not hide the weapon. He did not try to make it look like an accident or stage the scene. Instead, he walked off the trail to a nearby home owned by a woman named Mrs. Ethel Whitehead. He told her what he had done. The Carter County Sheriff was called. Bigley surrendered without resistance. The hatchet was recovered near the shelter. What he told investigators when they asked him, why is the part of the case that has stayed in trail folklore for decades? He said he had killed Janice because he coveted her backpack. Her pack was a particular brand he wanted for himself. That was the entire reason. There was no robbery escalation. There was no argument that got out of hand. There was no mental break that the shelter logs or other hikers could later point to. By his own account, the killer had simply decided he wanted her gear, and what he was willing to do to get it was final. Bigley pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in 1976. He was sentenced to a Tennessee state prison and died there while serving his sentence. Sources differ on whether his death came less than a year into his term or several years in. A precise date for his death has never been confirmed in publicly indexed reporting. What survives the case, more than 50 years later, is the shelter itself. The Vandeventer Shelter remains an active Appalachian Trail shelter to this day. Hikers still stop there every season. The shelter has, over the decades, picked up persistent local lore, with hikers passing along ghost story claims tied to the killing. The case has been documented on the Park Predators podcast in an episode titled The Confession, and on multiple Appalachian Trail crime catalogs maintained by hiker communities. There is one important note about this case that deserves to be cleared up, because it has been mistakenly attributed elsewhere. Janice Balza was not killed by Randall Lee Smith. Smith was a different killer who took the lives of two hikers named Robert Mountford Jr. and Laura Susan Ramsey on the Appalachian Trail in Virginia in May 1981. Smith served 15 years, was released in 1996, and in 2008 returned to the same area and shot two fishermen, both of whom survived. He died in prison shortly after. The two cases are sometimes confused, but the killer of Janice Balza was Paul Walter Bigley, who acted alone, who confessed within hours, and whose only stated motive was a backpack. Both Janice Balza and Paul Bigley have now been gone for decades. The shelter remains. The case remains closed. The motive, in some ways, has never made any more sense than it did the day Bigley walked down the mountain to confess. While Janice's case ended with a confession that came within hours, the next one is different. The killer was never found. The trail he was walking has been walked since by thousands of people, and the FBI is still asking for tips today. Scott Lilly. The next case is one of the few on this list that remains officially unsolved. A young Civil War history buff hiking through Virginia, a partially buried body found by other hikers, 5 trail aliases the FBI publicly named, and a $10,000 reward that has been sitting on the case since 2012. Scott Allen Lilly was 30 years old. From South Bend, Indiana, born in Mishawaka, he stood about 5'8" and weighed around 150 pounds. He was a Civil War history buff. He had chosen the trail name Stonewall, in homage to Confederate General Thomas Stonewall Jackson. He was not particularly experienced as a hiker. He had been introduced to the Appalachian Trail by his childhood pastor, a man named Craig Clapper, who would later thru-hike the trail in Scott's memory in 2013. Scott began a southbound section hike on the 15th of June 2011 from the border of Maryland and Pennsylvania. His plan was to make it to Springer Mountain in Georgia while visiting Civil War battlefields along the way. The last verified contact with his family was on the 31st of July 2011 after he had climbed a peak called the Priest, just over 4,000 feet, in Nelson County, Virginia. Then he went silent. How does an active hiker, in regular contact with his family, vanish on a marked national trail? The answer arrived 12 days later. On Friday, the 12th of August 2011, a group of hikers walking the old hotel trail loop near the Cow Camp Gap shelter in the Mount Pleasant Special Management Area of George Washington, Jefferson National Forest in Amherst County, Virginia, found his partially buried body. The autopsy by the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner in Roanoke ruled the death a homicide. The cause of death was listed as asphyxia by suffocation. The estimated time since death was around 12 days. Because the killing took place on federal land, the FBI took the lead. Special Agents Steve Duenas and Mike Morehart headed the investigation. They worked with the National Park Service Appalachian Trail Rangers, the U.S. Forest Service, the Virginia State Police, and the Amherst County Sheriff's Office. They conducted 83 interviews across multiple states and 2 foreign countries. They collected more than 100 pieces of evidence. They covered more than 270 miles of trail. In a press release on the 2nd of September 2011, the FBI publicly named 5 trail aliases of people they wanted to interview. The names were Mr. Coffee, White Wolf, Papa Smurf, Combat Gizmo, and Space Cadet. The last was possibly a husband and wife team. All 5 were eventually spoken to. None were ever named as suspects. Online speculation latched onto Papa Smurf as a person of interest. The FBI explicitly disclaimed that, with spokesperson D. Rybisky telling the Rockbridge Report that there were 3 or 4 different Papa Smurfs out there at any given time on the trail. Several items of Scott's gear were missing from the scene. His blue or purple backpack, his brown and orange Walmart brand Ozark Trail hiking shoes, a propane stove, a Nintendo handheld game, an Appalachian Trail handbook. Despite the obvious theft, the FBI publicly declined to name robbery as the motive. United States Attorney Tim Heaphy stated that he saw no apparent connection between Scott's killing and other unsolved Blue Ridge Parkway cases, including the famous 1996 Williams and Winans murders in nearby Shenandoah National Park. What struck investigators was the methodical nature of the attack. The Cow Camp Gap shelter sits in a remote section of National Forest. Whoever had attacked Scott had taken time, had partially buried his body, had taken his gear, and had walked away. That kind of behavior is rare in random encounters on the trail. The case is, as of late 2025, still officially unsolved. The $10,000 FBI reward, announced on the 25th of April 2012 by U.S. Attorney Heaphy and Scott's sister Allison, remains active. The tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI, option 4. As of November 2025, no public update from the FBI Richmond field office has named a suspect. Scott's pastor Craig Clapper completed his memorial through hike of the Appalachian Trail in 2013. While Scott's case remains open, the next one is one of the most well-known crimes ever committed on the Appalachian Trail. It also became a turning point for hate crime advocacy across the United States. While Scott's case remains open, the next one took place on a quiet Pennsylvania campsite, ended with a witness hiking 4 miles wounded to find help, and became one of the most important hate crime cases in modern American history. Rebecca White and Claudia Brenner. Rebecca Patricia White was 28 years old, of Iranian-Puerto Rican heritage, a master's-level business administration student at Virginia Tech. Claudia Brenner was a master's-level architecture student also at Virginia Tech, born and raised in Manhattan. The two had met at Tech and had been a couple for 2 years. Brenner was based in Ithaca, New York at the time. They had agreed to meet up and spend a few days together hiking on the Appalachian Trail. In May 1988, the two met up to go hiking together. They parked their car at a place called Dead Woman Hollow Road and hiked into Pennsylvania's Michaud State Forest in Adams County. They camped there on the 12th of May. At a public outhouse, White encountered a stranger, a 22-year-old man named Stephen Roy Carr, who had been living in caves and lean-tos in the forest. He was a fugitive with an outstanding Florida grand larceny warrant. He asked her for a cigarette. The couple decided to move to a more private campsite. They had no idea Carr had followed them. How does a stranger living in a forest become a killer over the course of a single afternoon? The answer is that on the afternoon of the 13th of May, 1988, Carr secretly observed the couple. Then he opened fire on them with a .22 caliber rifle. He fired 8 shots in total. 5 hit Brenner in her arm, face, neck, and head. 2 hit White, with one of the bullets shattering her liver. 1 shot missed both of them. Brenner, despite being gravely wounded, made the decision that saved her life. She told White to stay still, and she began walking. Brenner hiked roughly 4 miles to a road. She got a ride to the Shippensburg police station. By the time rescuers reached the campsite, White had already passed away from her wounds. Carr had left the scene with 25 unfired rounds and a knit cap behind him. Carr was on the run for 10 days. He hid in a Mennonite community, working farm chores. He was finally identified when one community member who had been secretly watching television recognized the police composite sketch of him and called police. Carr was arrested on his outstanding Florida fugitive warrant. He waived his right to a jury trial in exchange for the prosecution dropping the death penalty. The bench trial was conducted before Judge Oscar Spicer. Carr's defense attempted to introduce his personal history, including alleged constant rejection by women, including a mother who may have been in a same-sex relationship, as the basis for a heat of passion, voluntary manslaughter mitigation. Judge Spicer disallowed the evidence as irrelevant. Carr was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. The Superior Court of Pennsylvania affirmed the conviction in September 1990. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court denied his final appeal in March 1991. Now we get to the part of the case that turned a personal tragedy into a national movement. Claudia Brenner, after her recovery, partnered with the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force and became a national speaker on anti-LGBTQ violence. In 1995, she published a book titled 8 Bullets, One Woman's Story of Surviving Anti-Gay Violence. She gave an interview to NPR's Fresh Air. A short documentary called In the Hollow premiered in 2015. As of late 2025, Stephen Roy Carr remains incarcerated in the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections, serving life without parole at age 63. Claudia Brenner continues to work as an architect and an activist. The 1988 case is widely cited as a watershed moment in United States anti-LGBTQ hate crime advocacy, while Rebecca and Claudia's case ended with one survivor and a national advocacy movement. The next case, 2 years later and on the same Appalachian Trail, ended with no survivors and a killer who took his victims' boots and gear with him as he kept walking. Molly LaRue and Jeffrey Hood. The next case is one of the most disturbing crimes in Appalachian Trail history. A young couple through hiking from Maine to Georgia, a fugitive walking the trail in the opposite direction, and a killer who was caught only because he was wearing his victim's clothing when he asked another hiker for directions. Molly Ann LaRue was 25 years old, of Shaker Heights, Ohio. She was a fine arts graduate of Ohio Wesleyan University, a licensed outward-bound instructor, an EMT, and an experienced backpacker and climber. As a high school student, she had won the United States Postal Service National Stamp Design Contest. Jeffrey Logan Hood was 26, of Signal Mountain, Tennessee, a University of Tennessee teaching graduate. The two had met working a church-sponsored at-risk youth nature program in Salina, Kansas. They were engaged and were planning to start their own youth nature nonprofit and to begin graduate school in January 1991. They began their southbound through hike at Mount Katahdin, Maine on the 4th of June 1990. Molly's trail name was Nalgene. Jeff's trail name was Clevis. By September, they had made it through 9 states and were in Pennsylvania. On the 11th of September 1990, they stayed at the Doyle Hotel in Duncannon, Pennsylvania. After lunch on the 12th with Molly's great-aunt, they hiked out to the Thelma Marks shelter on Cove Mountain in Perry County. They were not alone there. A man calling himself David Casey Horn was walking the trail in the opposite direction and crossed paths with them. His real name was Paul David Cruz. How does a through hiking couple, almost finished with a journey of more than 2,000 miles, end up as the targets of a man walking the same trail? The answer was that Cruz was already a wanted fugitive. He was being pursued in connection with the 1986 killing of a woman named Clemmy Jewel Arnold in Bartow, Florida. He had been moving across state lines using fake names. The Appalachian Trail, in the days before widespread mobile phone use, had become a way for him to disappear. On the morning of the 13th of September, 1990, Cruz attacked Molly and Jeff at the Thelma Marks shelter. Jeff was shot 3 times with a .22 caliber pistol. Molly was bound with rope around her neck and her hands tied behind her back and was attacked with a knife. She was found with 8 wounds to her neck, throat, and back. The 2 of them were discovered later that day by another southbound through hiking couple, Cindy and Brian Bowen, who had been tracking Molly and Jeff's progress through trail register entries left at the shelters along the way. Cruz was apprehended on the 21st of September 1990 near Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. Another hiker had reported a man with an oversized, ill-fitting backpack acting strangely on the trail. Police caught up with him. He gave the alias David Casey Horn. He was identified by his fingerprints, his photograph, and a shoulder tattoo that matched the outstanding 1986 Florida warrant. He was wearing the victim's boots. He was carrying their gear. The 2 murder weapons, the .22 revolver and a bloody knife matching Molly's blood type, were both in his possession. The trial was held in Perry County. Cruz was convicted on 2 counts of first-degree murder. The jury deliberated for under an hour after 8 days of testimony. A key forensic finding was that DNA testing matched evidence from Molly's body to Cruz. He was initially sentenced to death. Following years of appeals, including a Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruling in 1994 and a Third Circuit federal decision in March 2004, the prosecution agreed to forego the death penalty. Cruz was resentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without parole. Paul David Cruz died of natural causes in July 2022 at SCI Fayette in Pennsylvania, age 70. In October 2000, the LaRue and Hood families and 40 other hikers dedicated the new Cove Mountain shelter to Molly and Jeff. It replaced the Thelma Marks shelter where the killings had taken place. While Molly and Jeff's case was solved by a tip from another hiker in 1990, the next case stayed cold for nearly 30 years and was finally cracked open by a name that had never come up once in the original investigation: Julie Williams and Lolly Winans. The next case stayed cold for 28 years and was finally solved by a single DNA match to a man already long dead, a man whose name had never come up once in the original investigation, despite the fact that he was a documented serial offender driving the same kinds of vehicles he had been driving for decades. Julianne Marie Julie Williams was 24 years old, of St. Cloud, Minnesota, about to start a job in Lake Champlain, Vermont. Laura Lolly Salisbury Winans was 26, born into a wealthy Michigan family in Grosse Pointe and based in Unity, Maine. Both women were experienced outdoor guides with dozens of wilderness trips between them. They were a couple. They had been working summer jobs at a Vermont outdoor program. The trip into Shenandoah National Park was meant to be a short break before their next round of work assignments. They began their trip with Lolly's golden retriever, Taj, on the 19th of May, 1996, in Shenandoah National Park, Virginia. They hiked the White Oak Canyon Trail and summited Hawksbill, Shenandoah's highest mountain. They pitched their final camp roughly a quarter-mile from Skyline Drive, near Skyland Resort. The last day they were seen alive in the park was the 24th of May, 1996. Julie's father reported them missing on the 31st of May. Their bodies were located on the 1st of June 1996 by National Park Service rangers. Taj, the golden retriever, was found wandering the White Oak Canyon Trail, alive. Both women's hands were bound, their mouths gagged, and their throats had been cut. Lolly was inside the tent. Julie was about 40 feet downslope in a sleeping bag. Both were partially undressed. The original 1996 examinations indicated no sexual assault, a finding that would later be revised. How does a homicide in a national park stay unsolved for nearly 3 decades? The answer is that it did not, for lack of trying. The FBI and National Park Service pursued around 15,000 leads over the years. In April 2002, then Attorney General John Ashcroft announced charges of capital murder and a federal hate crime against a Maryland computer programmer named Daryl David Rice. Rice was already serving an 11-year sentence for the 1997 attempted abduction of a female bicyclist in the same park. The charges against him were quietly dropped in 2004 when DNA at the scene excluded him entirely. The break that nobody saw coming arrived in 2024. A new FBI Richmond cold case team that had been formed in 2021, led by Agent Jane Collins, with original lead ranger Tim Alley working as a private detective, had reassessed hundreds of old leads. They sent several items of evidence to an accredited private lab for new DNA testing. With Virginia State Police assistance, the resulting profile was uploaded to the FBI's CODIS database. It came back with a match. The match was to a man named Walter Leo Jackson Sr., a Cleveland area residential painter and a documented serial offender. The FBI then directly compared the crime scene DNA to a buckall swab from Jackson and confirmed the match. United States Attorney Christopher R. Kavanaugh said the statistical certainty was 1 in 2.6 trillion. On the 20th of June 2024, the FBI Richmond Field Office and the United States Attorney's Office for the Western District of Virginia publicly announced the identification. Walter Leo Jackson had been an avid hiker and a residential painter. His criminal record stretched across decades, including documented incarcerations in Ohio in the 1980s, the 1990s, and again from 2000 to 2007. He was finally caught in 2011 for the abduction and assault of a victim he had taken into his Ford Econoline van. He died in March 2018 at age 70 in an Ohio prison. The retesting also revised the original 1996 finding. United States Attorney Kavanaugh stated there was no evidence the killings had been motivated by the women's sexual orientation, despite the 2002 hate crime framing. While Julie and Lolly's case was solved by a DNA match to a long-dead serial offender, the next case is one of the most personal stories on the entire list. A young woman who fought her attacker so hard, he had to admit on record she nearly broke free. Meredith Emerson. The next case is one of the most striking stories of resistance ever recorded in a wilderness homicide. A graduate of the University of Georgia, a serial killer who had been targeting hikers in national forests for years, and a fight on Blood Mountain that the killer himself would later describe in detail. Meredith Hope Emerson was 24 years old. She had been born in Charleston, South Carolina, raised in North Carolina and Longmont, Colorado. In 2005, she had graduated with honors from the University of Georgia with a degree in French. She worked as a sales manager and lived in Beaufort, Georgia, with her black Labrador mix, Ella, whom she had rescued from a shelter. She had also trained in 2 martial arts and held a blue belt in Aikido. On New Year's Day, the 1st of January 2008, Meredith set out from Vogel State Park up Blood Mountain, the highest peak on Georgia's Appalachian Trail, with Ella. Witnesses saw her hiking briefly with an older man, wearing high-end gear and carrying a police-style baton and a knife on his belt. He was, oddly, walking with duct tape on his shoes. That man was a 61-year-old drifter named Gary Michael Hilton, who was using his own golden retriever, Dandy, to gain the trust of strangers on the trail. Meredith out-hiked Hilton on the way up. On her way back down, he ambushed her and demanded her ATM card. What happened next is what set this case apart from almost any other on this list. How does a single hiker, attacked by an armed man on an isolated mountain, hold him off long enough to make him remember her years later? The answer was that Meredith fought back ferociously. Hilton would later tell investigators that she grabbed the knife blade with her bare hands, that she had real quick hands, that she broke his hand, and that it took multiple strikes for him to subdue her. He kidnapped her, kept her in his van, and held her for 3 full days. During those 3 days, she gave him repeatedly wrong pins at ATMs, in what investigators believe was a deliberate effort to extend her own life and give searchers more time. Her car was found on the 2nd of January, with her water bottle, dog leash, and a police baton inside. On the 4th of January 2008, 2 anonymous tips placed Hilton at a gas station in DeKalb County, where he was cleaning out his Chevrolet Astro van. Police arrived before he could finish bleaching the interior. Blood matching Meredith's DNA was recovered from inside the vehicle. Ella, her dog, was found alive on the same day in a Kroger parking lot in Cumming, Georgia, and was later adopted by Meredith's parents in Colorado. In exchange for the prosecution dropping the death penalty and rehoming his own dog Dandy, Hilton led investigators to Meredith's body in the Dawson Forest Wildlife Management Area, around 40 miles from where they had last been seen. Hilton pleaded guilty in Dawson County Superior Court on the 30th of January 2008 and was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole after 30 years. What investigators learned in the months that followed turned this from a single tragedy into a national serial killer case. Hilton was tied to the October 2007 killings of John and Irene Bryant, a retired hiking couple from North Carolina in Pisgah National Forest. He pleaded guilty to those killings as well. He was also tied to the December 2007 death of Cheryl Hodges Dunlap, a Tallahassee nurse in Apalachicola National Forest, for which he was sentenced to death in Florida in April 2011. As of 2025, Hilton, now 79, remains on Florida's death row at Union Correctional Institution. In April 2025, in a court TV interview taped for the series Interview with a Killer, Hilton confessed on camera to the Cheryl Dunlap killing for the first time, calling himself the Beast of Blood Mountain. Meredith's family and friends founded the Right to Hike anti-abduction education group and an annual community event called Ella's Run. Georgia passed the Meredith Emerson Memorial Privacy Act in March 2010. While Meredith's case ended with a confession from one of the most prolific killers on this list. The final case on our list is the only one where the killer has never been confirmed, and where, in October 2025, a brand new tip has revived an investigation that had gone cold for decades. Amy Roe Bechtel. The final case on our list is the only one where, almost 30 years on, no one has ever been arrested. A record-breaking distance runner, a quiet afternoon scouting a road in Wyoming, and a tip in October 2025 that has revived an investigation gone cold for decades. Amy Joy Roe Bechtel was 24 years old. She had been a Douglas High School track standout and a record-breaking distance runner at the University of Wyoming, where she still holds the school record for the 3,000 meters. Her marathon personal best was 3 hours and 1 minute. She had aspired to qualify for the 2000 United States Olympic Marathon Trials. She had married her husband Steve in June 1996 and had recently bought a house in Lander, Wyoming, on the morning of the 24th of July 1997. Amy taught a children's weightlifting class. She ran errands. At 2:30 in the afternoon, she was at the Camera Connection photo store. From there, she visited a place called Gallery 331. The owner of the gallery, Greg Wagner, was the last confirmed sighting of her alive. Her plan that afternoon was to drive into Shoshone National Forest via Sinks Canyon State Park, up Loop Road, to scout the route for a 10-kilometer hill climb she was organizing for September. She wore a yellow tank top, blue shorts, Adidas Trail Response sneakers, a Timex Ironman watch, and her wedding band. Her husband Steve was rock climbing in Dubois, Wyoming, with a friend. He returned home at 4:30 in the afternoon. By 10 that night, when Amy was still not home, he called her parents. At 1 in the morning on the 25th, friends found her white Toyota Tercel station wagon at the Burnt Gulch turnoff off Loop Road. The doors were unlocked. The keys were on the passenger seat under her to-do list. Her sunglasses were still inside. Her Green Eagle Creek wallet was missing. How does an experienced runner familiar with the terrain disappear in the middle of an afternoon scouting trip without leaving any sign of struggle? Investigators initially treated Steve Bechtel as a person of interest. They had found journals containing violent imagery and song lyrics describing harm to women. Steve refused to take a polygraph after detectives falsely told him on the 1st of August 1997 that they had evidence proving he had killed his wife. His alibi, that he had been climbing in Dubois, was corroborated by his friend and by phone records. He has never been charged. In late 1997, after a man named Dale Wayne Eaton was caught attempting to kidnap a stranded family in the Red Desert, his brother Richard told Fremont County detectives Dale had been camping at Burnt Gulch in summer 1997 and may have been involved. The tip was discounted at the time, in part because investigators were focused on Steve. Dale Eaton served only 99 days for the kidnapping in 1997. 5 years later, in 2002, DNA from the unrelated 1988 case of Lisa Marie Kimmel, the Lil Miss case, came back as a match to Eaton. Lisa's car was found buried as a septic tank on his property in Manita, Wyoming. He was convicted of Kimmel's killing in 2004 and originally sentenced to death. Eaton's death sentence was overturned by a Wyoming federal court in 2014 for ineffective penalty phase counsel. He was diagnosed with dementia and found incompetent to face a capital resentencing. He was sentenced to life in 2022. As of May 2025, Eaton, now 80, remains at the Wyoming Medium Correctional Institution in Torrington. Amy was declared legally dead in 2004. Then, on the 22nd of October 2025, a Wyoming woman named Tracy SV told Cowboy State Daily that she had records hidden inside one of Eaton's old vehicles. She wants the Fremont County Sheriff's Office to bring cadaver dogs to 2 old cabins on her property. Lieutenant John Zerga said the tip was credible enough for follow-up. Amy's brother Nels confirmed the family is working closely with both local investigators and the FBI on the Eaton angle. It is the first significant new lead in years. The tip line for the Fremont County Sheriff's Office is 307-332-5611. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.